The world is going through changes happening at a speed that we have never seen before. This is leading to disruption, chaos, panic, fear, hysteria, and a turbulent economy and marketplace. How do you protect your wealth in a turbulent world? How do you invest for cash flow in alternative assets to escape the rat race in times of uncertainty? How do you decentralize yourself, family, your community, your business, and your investments to become sovereign and escape the matrix? If you are looking for strategies, tactics, and techniques to escape the rat race and matrix, you are in the right place. My name is MC Lobsher, and this is Cashflow Ninja.
This is Cashflow Ninja. I'm MC Lobsher. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode and spending your most valuable resource, your time, once again with me. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. We have podcasts, books, reports, webinars, and much, much more. And don't forget to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Wealth Dojo. It's the #1 newsletter in the alternative wealth strategy and alternative asset investing space. You can subscribe by going to cashflowninja.com/subscribe. I've got a fantastic show for you today. I'm joined by Chris Rawley. We're going to talk about agricultural investments and more specifically investments in livestock. Chris has been on the show before. I would highly recommend go to cashflowninja.com and just type in Chris Rawley, where he spoke about agricultural investments. Chris, it's great to see you again.
Hey, great to be back. It's been a while, MC.
Yeah, so for our listeners and viewers that's not familiar with you, your background and your journey and what you're up to these days, can you please share a little bit more with us?
Yeah, sure. To start out, I'm the CEO of a company called Harvest Returns, and we like to consider ourselves the one-stop shop for investing in agriculture. But I'll back up a little bit and tell you how I got to where we are now and how I started the company. So I grew up in Texas, went to school with a lot of people that grew up in farms and ranches out in West Texas and a lot of small town folks. I did not. I'm a city boy. I grew up in Dallas, big town. After school, I went into the Navy. I was a naval officer for 30 years, active in reserve. So I got the opportunity to travel quite a bit, and I traveled to a lot of places that one might consider not garden spots. So I was in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, all across Africa. Saw some interesting countries. And one thing that I saw there during all those travels was that people don't take for granted their food like we do here in the States, especially the abundance of it, the variety of it, and that caused me when I came back to Texas, moved out sort of the country area, lived near farms and ranches, drove home every day by a bunch of cattle ranches, and saw that there was something to this. I've been a real estate investor, kind of my own account, like a lot of people. Started out investing in single family homes, apartments, things like that. Eventually I grew tired of that. And so, as you say, back in 2016, I burned the boats and jumped full time into starting this company, Harvest Returns, and brought in a partner, Austin Manis, who did grow up out in the country, working on his family's family farms over the summers. And so what we did, we knew that we wanted to invest in farms and we wanted to give people an opportunity to invest in agriculture. And so we gradually built up in 2016, launched in 2017, where we had our first couple of deals. And one of the very first deals we did that was pretty successful involved livestock and grass-fed cattle. And that was out in Georgia. And that one, when we did that one, it really gave us the opportunity to see that there's a way to make money investing in cattle and livestock ranches. And since then, we've probably done about half of our portfolio companies are involved in some sort of livestock ranching, whether it's cattle. We've done some sheep. And the way we structure these deals is pretty interesting. For the most part, they're private loans. And you might ask, why is a cattle rancher going to go and take a loan from a company, from investors like ours at a pretty significant rate when there's all kinds of banks and things like that. And that the thing is, the agriculture banking system in the United States, it's set up to mostly provide loans to row crop farmers, operating loans. There are of course banks that'll do cattle loans, but for the most part, if you're a new farmer, if you have a lot of land, but you don't have, you're starting out, you don't have cattle, you don't have all the fences, the infrastructure, the pens, the things it takes to raise cattle, it's harder to get a loan. So we've been able to put together these private credit investments. We've also done equity investments in livestock companies, and it's worked out really well for us. Our investors are happy with it, and we're pretty happy with it. And there's a whole, there's lots of different ways we can talk about that, but cattle livestock it's an American business. It's a business in a lot of countries, but it's an all American business, and we're happy to be part of it.
When you look at agricultural investments, so you've got your produce, your row crops, and you've got your livestock. I just wanted to kind of give context to our listeners and our viewers too, that this business is a tough business. You got to have some respect for folks in that industry. And
Yeah.
I wanted to just paint the picture. Number one, it's very tough. Number two, it stays tough because you're dealing with elements and nature and their seasonality, right? So when you walk into your grocery store and you just pick up your produce, or you pick up some of your meat at a butcher, that's kind of the interaction that people have with it. But this life cycle from basically a seed to get those produce out in a supermarket, or to get your perfectly filleted meat at your butcher, that's a long life cycle. So there's seasonalities to from the seed to where you buy it in the grocery store, and basically from the birth of a calf, let's just say, till the end where it ends up nicely filleted in a butcher. So, and in between that, growing up in between farms in South Africa too, the big thing is liquidity. Liquidity is massive, and this is where a lot of people in the industry and farmers, and specifically the people that they have to deal with is banks, right? And this is kind of just to set the table of where you've inserted yourself in the industry. Any comments on that? And if you just want to give us kind of an overview of what that looks like, especially the livestock industry, how that works.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. It's ranching is a tough industry. No matter where you are, no matter how you do it, there's so many variables involved. But let's look at the cattle industry today. What's happened the past couple of years? We have record high prices. So everybody knows that if you go to the grocery store, and even if you just get a pound of ground hamburger, 30% fat content, it's gone up at least 20% in the past 3 or 4 years. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, there's the overall inflation factors, too much liquidity in the money supply, but there's also inputs. So to raise cattle, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. There's a lot of different methods to do it, and a lot of different business models. And we work with quite a bit of variety in the business models. But some of the basics are, you have to raise the cattle, so they've got to eat. And so how do they eat? So you hear all cattle, they're obviously on their mother's milk. Then they generally are going to live in the pasture, and at some point or another, that rancher is going to make a decision: am I going to continue to feed this cattle on grass, or am I going to take them to am I going to feed them on grain, or put them to a feedlot and they'll eat some kind of grain, probably corn based feed, which will enable them to grow a lot more rapidly. That industry, that side of the industry, the grain fed, it gets a lot of bad raps, and sometimes for good reasons, others not. We're pro meat, pro cattle for a variety of reasons, and we can talk about the environmental impact and the health and all those sorts of things. There's a lot of misinformation out there about cattle being bad for the environment, and it's really not true. It's based on some flawed studies and some flawed data and misinformation. But recently, there's been droughts the past couple of years. This is a cyclical thing and happens every 15, 20 years. that caused with the raising input prices, so fertilizer's gone up, so that causes farmers that raise hay, which is exported across the country to feed cattle, and alfalfa and products like that. Those prices have inflated. That causes input prices to the cattle ranchers to go, which results in a higher end price for the consumers, whether you're buying it in a grocery store, whether you're buying it, in bulk, box meat, or at a high-end restaurant. However you're buying it, you notice that meat prices are up. So that's an opportunity, and that's for ranchers. It's the same for ranchers that are innovative and that have flexible source of capital, which we sort of pride ourselves on, being that ready, flexible source of capital that is more willing to do business in a more creative way that a bank might be for a cattle rancher. We work with cattle ranchers that are doing things innovatively. So they're raising innovatively. Regenerative cattle, or regenerative livestock operations is a term you'll hear, and that basically means it's a very natural way to raise livestock. It's more, it's organic. They're not using synthetic chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, things like that. They're using the cattle to actually improve the soil quality, improve the grasslands, restore native grasslands. And so we really like those because that type of operation, you can sell that meat at a premium price, and that's insulates you from some of the commodity-based feed prices that some of the commodity producers might deal with. There's also all kinds of weird market dynamics in the cattle industry, a little bit of distortion caused by sort of the monopoly that the big four, big five meat packers have. There's a lot of smaller processors around the country, and generally most of the producers we work with are working with those smaller processors, where they're taking that animal, they're slaughtering that animal and packing it and getting it to market. We also like producers that are selling under their own label. So it's not that commodity beef. It's whether it's sold in a local farmer's market or sold via a website in their own brand. Those producers can take more of the percentage of the dollar from every dollar of meat that's sold versus people that have very low margin businesses. And some of these businesses are making money. Some of them are just barely hanging on. Like you say, it's a very tough business, depending on so many external factors, be it weather, be it just the commodity manipulation by the meat processors, or just other external factors like input prices.
So just to take off my investor's hat for a second, I mean, the importance of access or proximity to your food is huge.
Yes.
And I mean, here in Pennsylvania, one of the reasons why I love the area that we live in is there's a ton of farms that you can drive directly to and go buy your food. You know exactly where it's coming from. And also in the farmers market. And again, there's a lot of Amish farmers in Pennsylvania and in other states in the U.S., but just close to where I'm at. And access to your food and proximity to it is pretty big. So you know exactly where it's coming from. You know what's going on the farm for the most part. You're not watching over their shoulder, but there's, in high trust societies, you kind of expect certain things, and people are pretty transparent. So it's so important at all times, and especially now more than ever. One of the other things I also wanted to touch on is the farming business itself. Like you mentioned, there's so many. It's hard to begin with, and then because of all of the the inflation, which if you just, I think, it was Trueflation has shared that since 2020, this is an AI model, so they scrape basically the internet, sweep it. Trueflation was stating that was around almost 26%. Then you just had a credit bureau, forget which one, that just came out that food inflation was around 30%. Yeah. And all the inputs that's going into these farming businesses, they've gone up significantly. I mean, you talk about fertilizer, which a lot of people don't know where most of the world's fertilizer come from. Right. Shocking to find out that it's Ukraine and Russia and in that area. Right. Yeah, so there's a lot of inputs that have gone up, so it's a tough business.
That whole thing definitely, added some shocks to the commodity prices, and that's part of those, that the prices of cattle became so high. They were so hard to feed, so expensive to feed. 2 years ago, there was some pretty significant culls, and when they say culls, that these are just animals coming to market early, probably earlier than they should have, and that's resulted in the record low herds that we see now. The size of the overall cattle herd in the United States right now is where it was in the early 1950s. So it's
Wow.
people think there's a whole lot of cattle, and there are lots of cattle. I don't remember the exact the herd size right now, but it's pretty low historically, at least in the past several decades, and that's what's driving farmers to want to rebuild their herds, which means that's a capital intensive thing. They need to go out and buy cattle. It's high prices, and it's hard to get loans, and it's hard to create a profitable business model. And that's kind of where we are in the cycle right now. But we're still working with these farmers who have higher margin businesses and who have kind of figured out the secret sauce to making a profit in cattle ranching. And those are the ones that we like to work with.
Yeah, and all of my listeners that's listening to this, they know all the nonsense with cow farts and all that. That's all nonsense. So it's all the quote unquote studies that have come out, pro cow farts. It's if you torture data, it will confess, right? So that's what's happening there. That's just pure propaganda. If you're listening to this show, you could spot that a mile away. So without farms, you don't have food, folks. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that you guys do obviously a lot of loans, right, and debt, and there's some equity plays too. So is that where you partner with a lot of these farmers?
Yeah, we partnered on what I would call early stage businesses, early stage agriculture businesses, including a couple of ranches or a few farms. Livestock operations, a sheep operation. The nice thing that we like about cattle, you kind of mentioned it, is that people are able to access cattle any place in the country, or you can raise cattle. It's the one sort of agriculture product that does well just about anywhere in the country, with variations. Unlike, say, leafy greens, I think it's 70+% of the leafy greens we consume are all grown in Salinas Valley, California. So it's a very small, centralized place that with a supply chain that goes all over the country. Whereas cattle, there's a lot of cattle up in the Great Plains. We've done, Montana, Idaho. We've got companies we work with there. Down in the southeast United States, Georgia, Southern California, we've got cattle. Of course, Texas, and even up in Iowa, Midwest. If it were up to me, a lot of the corn that the government subsidizes to create ethanol to make people buy that they don't want to buy because it ruins their engines, that would be replaced with cattle ranching up in that wonderful soil we have up in the Midwest United States. That's just being chemicals poured on it to grow corn and soybeans, mostly for export and for, like I said, ethanol. But cattle will, it's a product that can thrive anywhere there's grass, anywhere there's native grasses, and the fact that keeps, it's a preservation thing, it's a conservation thing. Raising cattle will preserve these natural prairies where that's you get into the environmental discussion where it's bad for the environment. It's the complete opposite. Cattle ranchers are preserving native grasslands, and I can't think of a better way to preserve conserve the natural resources we have in the United States, because those farmers don't want to ruin their land. They want to continue to thrive, and they want to continue to make money. And the only way they do that is to save their land.
How do you achieve clarity, certainty, and predictability in a world, economy, and markets that are volatile and chaotic? How do you have confidence in an environment where change and disruption is constant? Setting up infinite banking is how you establish certainty in an uncertain world, predictability in an unpredictable world. With an infinite banking policy, you have your capital warehoused outside of the Wall Street casino, where it is guaranteed never to go down in value and guaranteed to grow tax-free.
you have guaranteed access to your capital, and you also will be able to access your capital tax-free to use to capitalize on opportunities as you come across them. Creating your own banking system with infinite banking can be your secret weapon to protect and grow wealth during turbulent times. You can watch a presentation and explore infinite banking options for you and your family at yourownbankingsystem.com. That's yourownbankingsystem.com. Yeah. And most people that are not familiar with farming don't know this, how you move your herd around the farm to regrow and regrow certain areas of the farm of grass. So it's not like you stick them on one paddock and that's it, and you just destroy the soil and the grass and everything underneath it. You move it throughout the year, so you regrow areas so that you have food. There's so much to go. I could almost do an entire podcast just on farming. There's a lot of good life lessons in business and investing lessons when you look at how you actually farm, right?
Yeah, for sure. That intensive grazing you talk about, it's the cow poop and the cows trampling that poop down in the soil, and they top off the grass so the dead grass can regenerate the next season, and then they move on to another paddock, like you say. And we have farmers we work with, ranchers that are really trying to mimic the way ruminants like bison, elk, native animals in North America, they grazed. Cows are kind of dumb. They kind of wander around, versus like bison, they're very intense. But you can drive them and kind of train them to stay in a small paddock, take care of that paddock, and to move them on. And a lot of the ranchers we deal with are doing this form of regenerative grazing.
I'll say this about livestock too. Just even like subconsciously, humans know that's real wealth. And why I say that, if you look at, I mean, I'll just point back to my country of origin in Africa. That and if you different types of capital exist, right? Financial capital is just one thing. You have social capital, political capital, and not meaning anything in the political system, but the ability to influence, other people and groups of people. You have relationship capital, all those different types of capital. And this is like physical, real, like life. That is a type of capital of wealth, and when you grow your wealth, people always say, well, what does that mean? What is wealth? Well, it consists out of different forms of capital. Your own health, that is a source of capital too. You grow it by investing in it every day, working out, eating properly, hydrating, getting enough sleep, that kind of stuff. So if you look at, even in South Africa, where I'm from, and other places in Africa, you have dowry still, lobolo, where dowry is paid by the family that to the other family that is of the daughter in the marriage, right? So dowry is being paid, and it's usually heads of cattle because that is wealth. And again, you talk about a self-multiplying capital that grows, and it's not an interest rate set at a bank or by the Federal Reserve. It has nothing to do with that. You take care of your wealth, that source of capital, and that'll multiply and it'll grow with each and every generation. So that is a massive source of wealth. So just any comments on that? And also, why do investors invest in livestock? What's the big attraction?
Yeah, so it definitely is a traditional societal business. I mean, you mentioned Africa. There's entire tribes that are based on the wealth of their livestock, and that's how they survive and thrive. And you can translate that into a modern day rancher somewhere in the U.S. where they've got their prize bulls that's and the genetics from those bulls that they're going to keep those. They're never going to sell those because that's how they grow their herd, and they keep the quality of the product up. And they're going to even as prices rise and fall, and they have to make decisions on each year, are they going to sell some calves off to somebody else to background and grow, or are they going to preserve that feedstock essentially to grow their herd? Those decisions are happening every single day, and the ranchers we work with, that is their wealth, their land and their cattle. and the interrelationship between those two are very important. And so, from an investor standpoint, it's like real estate. It's a tangible thing. So people who are looking to invest in something tangible, they can invest in equity in one of these farms. There's a land component. There's an animal component. There's that growing over time. It's definitely not a get rich scheme. It's let nature run its course and let biology grow those herds and grow the wealth of the both the farmers and the investors. And there's that immutable land component. Like that land is going to be there. It's going to slowly rise in value over the years. And those ranchers, those are the two most important things to them. So when you're an investor, that's it. I think we're one of the few places that you can invest in livestock operations. There's plenty of places you can go and invest in a farmland fund. Most of them are just have exposure to those row crops, and they're also it's a way to get tangible exposure. But there's something about livestock that we like. It's much more dynamic than just than those row crops. I mean, we love all kinds of agriculture. We think it's important. Ag is the one industry that impacts every single person on the planet. That and to a certain extent real estate, but if you don't have food, you don't survive. So we think the farmers we work with are salt of the earth. Most of them, these are family farms. So even if they're very big and operations, they're still run by their families, and many times they're multi-generational. So we'll have we multi-generational farmers where they may have a grandfather who had the land, who bought the land, or even generations back to the pioneer days where that land is in the family. Yet they still need this capital because of the cyclical nature, or maybe it skipped a generation. The land stayed in the family, but the ranching didn't. And these younger folks are coming back in and want to continue that legacy of their family, but they need funding to do that, and that's where we come in, and it's really rewarding. When you see these investments grow a herd and take a young livestock producer and watch them mature. We've got not just cattle. We've got a bison ranch out in Montana and Oregon. Woman owned. Her family runs that ranch, and they sell all kinds of great products out in the West. Not just the bison steaks, which are amazing. That's really, I like bison probably more than I like beef, but I love beef. But the steaks and she turns it into jerky and all kinds of the salamis and things like that, and it's really amazing.
So if you look at it from an investment perspective, it's real, it's tangible. Like I said,
Exactly.
I mean, it's actual capital right there. Yeah. Great inflation hedge.
It is.
If you're living in one of the questions people always say in financial systems that are switching, which I believe we're in the process of one, real things are a great place to be from an investment perspective. And then obviously, if you look at our opportunity filter, can provide great cash flow, whether you're selling the cattle, whether you're eventually going from, completing the full cycle, right? Basically from raising them, feeding them, and eventually they are slaughtered and it gets sold off, right? And it ends up in your grocery store, or at your local butcher, or at your local farmer's market. Great cash flow opportunities. The other thing is the potential to appreciate is big, right? Too, as things go up, all the inputs, the outputs go up. And then you get to leverage the skill sets, capabilities, networks, and capital of others when you partner with people that know what they're doing. You don't necessarily have to know the ins and out of every single farming business and know how to fix a fence
Right.
with the cattle to break out of or run away of. You don't have to do that. Somebody else can do that. You can, as an investor, partner with them. Also, there's a ton of really good tax benefits in the farming industry. There is, again, the tax code's there for a reason. People kind of need food, otherwise they'll starve. So there's incentives for farmers too, from a tax standpoint, right?
Yeah, there are. There's a typical sort of real estate based tax advantages like depreciation. So livestock depreciates. It's a depreciable asset. All the infrastructure that goes into that. If you build a new barn or you build a any kind of assets, they're going to depreciate. But there's farmers pay a really most they have a lot of land, which is generally an expensive tax proposition, but they're getting agriculture exemptions, so they're paying little to no taxes on the underlying asset of the land compared to somebody that might have like a multifamily portfolio. So there are definitely some there's credits and things like that depending on what type of agriculture. There's this whole carbon credit scheme now that some of them are taking advantage of. So there's numerous financial assets. As far as the cash flow perspective, our investors in our cattle deals have seen anywhere between 7 to 17%, say, returns, and those can be paid quarterly. Sometimes they're annually. Sometimes it's a balloon loan. We've got did a debt fund recently. We closed out, and we'll probably do another one which is largely livestock, and it pushes out quarterly cash flow. So there's all different ways to kind of skin this cat and make money off of farming and especially livestock.
When you're providing liquidity as an investor and through a note to them, you also now, just like with real estate, have a physical asset that is backed, backing that note, right? So this isn't, it isn't an unsecured loan in that way that you and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of these herds that can be placed as collateral with certain institutions too, right?
Yeah, for sure. We'll collateralize on our private credit offerings. We collateralize the cattle, the livestock themselves. That's worked out well. Sometimes we'll put a lien, even in a first or second lien on the land underlying the cattle. We'll cross collateralize where it might be the cattle, the land. We've done horses even where there were expensive horses associated with the operation. So there's we pride ourselves on our flexibility and our creativity and our ability to get deals done in a way that produces these cash flows for our investors.
And then when we talk about the risk, because I always like to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, right?
Yep.
And we've already mentioned how tough of a business this is. You're dealing with nature, you're dealing with reality, which is very, very tough for anyone. But you're dealing with elements daily, and then of course you're dealing with things that are out of your control. The inputs that you need for your farming business could be affected by a war in the Ukraine, for example. So there's a lot of other variables that are not in your control, most of them actually, if you think about the natural elements. What are some of the other risks that people should be thinking about in this space?
Yeah, pricing is, there's always the possibility that the bottom could fall out of the cattle market. I don't see that happening anytime soon. So, but pricing is important. Like you said, input costs. The thing is, if input costs become too high, herds can be culled, which is what happened a couple of years ago. A lot of cattle were just sold off. If prices fall, the cattle can be just held. There's kind of a prime slaughter time for cattle, after a couple of years, but you can hold on to them. So you don't have to, as long as you're able to feed, as long as a rancher is able to feed their herd and pay for those underlying inputs, they can keep the herd until prices become more favorable and sell it off. And there's hedging that takes place. We've got some of our producers are very, very astute at being able to hedge, and there is, cattle is a tradable future. There's a commodity futures market for it, so you can do some creative hedging. But there's biology is definitely definitely an input. There's diseases we're seeing, in the dairy market right now, and we're invested in a dairy and a creamery. There's the whole bird flu that somehow jumped over to cattle. But there's mitigations for that. There's cattle, there's insurance, there's livestock insurance. So we try to work with, other than kind of pure fraud. There's a lot of ways to mitigate all that risk.
Yeah. And again, one of the things that we mentioned is the seasonality, the weather, the natural elements, and of course, all the other things, the financing. One of the things that I thought that I had when you mentioned that too is that is so important these days, because I see, like, especially in the farm community where I grew up in South Africa, there was a lot of farms that have been sold. It's
Mhm.
very tough for someone that finances that in a specific way. That, again, not all of them are financed exactly the same, but sometimes when there's financing involved, it's even harder.
Mhm.
If a land's paid off, a farm or a ranch and so forth, much easier to make a profit than when there's financing, and especially variable rates and so forth
Yeah,
on it
yeah.
as
I
well.
mean, we're paying more and more attention to the leverage that these ranches have on them. I So far I don't see it as a problem, but we are seeing some increasing leverage, and of course rates have gone up, so that's problematic. But I think there was back in the 80s in the U.S. there was a big, primarily on the farm side. I'm sure it hit the ranchers as well. It's a little bit before my time, but there was a lot of farms that had major issues because they were over leveraged, and I don't think we're in that space now. But it's certainly something to watch as rates continue to remain high.
Another thought that just came to mind too, exotic animals. Now, we've
Mhm.
mainly talked about livestock as in
Mhm.
cattle, and we talked bison. There's other forms of livestock too. You've mentioned sheep.
Mhm.
Um, what I've learned too, and this is again, thinking about it in South Africa, there was a massive rush into a buying game, wild,
Mhm.
and just antelope, different species and so forth, and a lot of celebrities got involved, and that was a massive bubble that eventually popped. So
Yeah.
there are things like that happens in the livestock space too. And just like with any other asset and investment class and niche, anything exotic, it might seem exciting, like exotic food, but you never know what's going to happen the next day, right?
Yeah, I know there's been some like boom and bust cycles with like emus and ostriches in the States and probably other places. There's some very profitable um, big game hunting operations in South Texas with exotic animals. Those are very niche. I don't know if they're investable, but people are making money with that. But that's different than I think what you're talking about is a,
Yes.
where we like the tulip a tulip boom and bust cycle. Haven't seen that. But we certainly keep our eyes on it because we don't want to get involved in a sort of commodity bust situation.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very, very interesting. What are some of the other trends and things of interest that you're paying attention to, that you're seeing in the agricultural space overall right now?
Yeah, so we're maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we got approached by companies. We initially focused on production agriculture, so ranching and farming. We got approached by technology companies that were serving agriculture, other agribusinesses. So we started raising capital for those, and some of them have done very, very well. And some are in the cattle space. I like to call it cattle tech. So there's a company we're invested in Dallas actually that provides monitoring using an AI tool for feedlot operations, where instead of the old guy that has been around for 40 years and knows what a cattle's supposed to look like, they've got an AI that's trained to determine cattle feeding and make sure that they've got enough water and make sure that identify sick cows and things like that. So that's been interesting. We've done things like vineyards and companies, technology around vineyards and winemaking. We've got it. Any number of companies. Agriculture, you look at it kind of from the outside and it looks very one-dimensional, but then when you start digging in and peeling back the layers, there's so many different ways to make money. So many different companies involved in agriculture production. The interesting thing is, MC, back in, I'm sure it was like this in most places 300 years ago, 200 years ago, 90 something percent of the population was involved in producing food in the US back in when the country was founded. Now it's less than 2%. So you've got 2% of the people producing food for the other 98% of us. And that shows the importance of this industry, but it also shows kind of what I would call the neglect and people taking it for granted. And when you invest in it, via our platform or other ways, that's one of the ways that you can get more exposure and a greater understanding of how farming works and how agriculture works and how important it is.
Yeah. And again, besides investing at it into real tangible assets that you can feel and touch,
Hmm.
you should also, from just a family security standpoint, have something in your garden and just
Yeah,
learn how to grow some food. Back you mentioned, it's a shocking statistic, but I don't think people understand how self-sufficient Americans were. And
mm,
and by the way, not just Americans, people all over the world,
everywhere. Yeah,
everywhere. Yeah, and all of a sudden it went from your agricultural age into the industrial age, and all of a sudden people left the farms and the connection that they had to their food, and went into the cities, and it was I guess it was revitalized a little bit with victory gardens back in, when was that, World
yeah.
War II,
Uh-huh.
where people took action to start growing some food in their backyard, or try to just a piece of land that they had access to. But I think that's definitely something that people should be thinking
Yeah,
about, especially in today's day and age, right?
that's a great recommendation. And there's a lot of ways to do that now. Even if you're like in a small apartment in an urban area, there's little hydroponic systems that you can grow tomatoes and peppers and a few things like that, herbs, where at least a tiny percentage of the amount of food you consume is grown locally. A lot of people are into getting in backyard chickens and things like that, and I think that's great too. There's a lady down the street from me that grows chickens, and I buy her eggs, and it's a win-win. I get fresh eggs, local eggs, and she gets a little income from her hobby, and all good things. And then buying from local farmers markets is another way you can like get more in touch with that agriculture system, support your local food security.
Yeah, absolutely. Support your local community, support the people around you, have direct access to food sources, and the way that they are all staying in business during, challenging times from time to time in that industry, is by
Yeah.
everybody supporting them in their community. So it's a win-win for everyone. Chris, this has been fantastic. Where can folks follow you? Where can they learn more about you and your company? And where can they stay in touch of all of the future projects that you're involved with?
Yeah, I mean, best place is harvestreturns.com. You can register; it's free. You get on there, you get access to see what deals that we launch. We got new deals coming about every 2 to 3 weeks. Any variety, not just livestock, but all types of agriculture and agribusinesses. And then, of course, we're on social media: Harvest Returns, Twitter or X, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those things. So yeah, just follow us and learn more about what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for coming on the show and sharing your insights and knowledge, and providing so much value to all of my listeners and my viewers.
Yeah, appreciate it, MC.
And thank you to all of my listeners and my viewers for spending, again, your most valuable resource, your time, with me on the show. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. Podcasts, books, reports, webinars, and much, much more. Don't forget to subscribe to the Wealth Dojo, the #1 newsletter in the alternative wealth strategy and alternative asset investing space, by going to cashflowninja.com/subscribe. Until next time, live infinitely.
This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. The information being presented and considered does not consider your particular financial objectives or situation, and it does not make personalized recommendations. This material is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified tax and legal advisor or other qualified professionals, and you should not use the information in place of a customized consultation with a licensed professional regarding your specific personal financial objectives, situation, and needs. We believe the information provided is reliable, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, timeliness, or completeness.